In this video, we're going to talk about the restrict access function inside of AsULearn. So for any resource within the class, if I turn editing on and I go into the settings for that resource, in this list we will see restrict access. And the way this works is we add a restriction based on some sort of criteria and either allow students to see that activity or restrict access to it so they can't get access. So we're going to add a restriction, and you see here we've got 5 different functions that we can do. We can do it by a date, and that will let us pick a range of dates. So I can say from or until. So I can get a start and stop date. Notice this is different for things like quizzes and activities that have a due date and a start date. This is separate from these. So typically the date function is only used for things like pages or resources that don't already have a date function built into them. I'm going to add a different restriction based on a grade. And so for this, it will let me pick a graded activity within the class. So for example, essay exam, and then I can set a grade must be greater than or equal to like 90. And then the student would only be able to see it if they've scored better than a 90 on the essay exam. Also with these, notice this student must have an essay or greater than a 90, but you can also say must not have, so you can restrict on the negative as well. So that was grade. We can also do it by group, so I can go in here and pick a group, and so they must be in that group or they must not be in that group, so there is still that negative piece. Additionally, we can do it on user profile. So within the user profile, we can pick any of these pieces. The most common, of course, is email address or last name. So a very typical use of this is I can pick a student's last name, and that student would be the only one that would access either email address or last name. So only the person with that email address could see the activity. That's a very common use of these. Additionally, I can do a restriction set, and what this will let us do is add restrictions together. So you could have a date and a name and a grade, so on and so forth. So those can get very long and complicated. Next thing I want to show you with this is, let's say that we're going to do by group. So I'm going to come in here and I'm going to choose the group A, and I'm going to show you from a student point of view someone that's not in group A. So what I want to point out is this little eyeball in the front. So this controls whether the student sees the activity but cannot access it, or if it hides the activity completely. So for assignment 1, I'm going to say this is restricted to group A, but I'm going to leave the eyeball open. So I'm going to save and return to course. And you can see here, even as the instructor, assignment 1 is not available unless you belong to group A. I'm going to do the same thing for assignment 2. I'm going to go down here and go to restrict access. We're going to add a restriction by group. We're going to choose group A just like we did before, but for assignment 2, I'm going to uncheck the eyeball so it has a little slash through it, and I want you to see the difference between those. So here I am as the instructor, and not available unless you're in group A, not available unless you're in group A, hidden otherwise. So now I'm going to log in as a student. So now I am logged in here as a student, and so I am not in group A, so this assignment 1 is not available to me. I can click on it, but it won't let me open it, and it tells me underneath of it, not available unless you belong to group A. But notice assignment 2 is simply missing. so I don't see it at all. So that's a great way to give access to a specific students without anybody else in the class seeing it. That's a way to hide, for instance, quiz 2 until they've scored a set amount on quiz 1. So you can decide whether to show it to them and tell them why they can't get access to it, or to hide it completely.